The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval training facility as Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez walked through the obstacle course area. With 22 years of SEAL experience under his belt, he had seen thousands of recruits come and go. Most were eager young men who thought they understood what it meant to be elite. Very few actually made it through the grueling selection process. Rodriguez stopped when he noticed someone moving through the rope climb section with unusual grace. The figure was smaller than the typical recruit, moving with a fluid precision that caught his attention. He watched as they completed a series of movements that most trainees struggled with for weeks. The technique was flawless, the timing perfect. "Hey, you there?" Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying the authority that came naturally after decades of command. The figure dropped from the rope and turned around, pulling off a training helmet to reveal shoulder-length auburn hair. Rodriguez felt his breath catch. Standing before him was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with determined green eyes and a confident posture. She wasn't supposed to be here. This was a restricted training area, and female personnel weren't typically allowed in this section of the base. "Sir," she responded crisply, snapping to attention with military precision. Her uniform was standard issue, but something about the way she wore it suggested this wasn't her first time in military gear. Small beads of sweat dotted her forehead, but her breathing was controlled. Professional. Rodriguez studied her face, noting the small scar above her left eyebrow and the calluses on her hands that spoke of serious training. This wasn't some civilian who had wandered onto the base by mistake. Everything about her screamed military experience, but he couldn't place her unit or rank from her appearance. "What's your name, soldier?" he asked, using the generic term while trying to figure out exactly who he was dealing with. The woman's eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite identify. It might have been amusement or perhaps recognition. She straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eyes. There was no fear there, no uncertainty, just a quiet confidence that reminded him of his most experienced operators. "Sarah Mitchell, sir," she replied, her voice steady and clear. The name hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. His face went completely still, his usual commanding expression freezing in place. Sarah Mitchell. He knew that name. Every SEAL worth their trident knew that name, though most had never seen the person behind it. Sarah Mitchell was a ghost in their community. A legend whispered about in briefing rooms and during late-night conversations between operators. She was the CIA operative who had spent 3 years embedded with Taliban forces in Afghanistan, the woman who had provided intelligence that saved dozens of American lives, the agent who had disappeared into the mountains of Pakistan and emerged 6 months later with information that led to the capture of a high-value terrorist target. But Sarah Mitchell was also the operative, who had been declared killed in action 18 months ago. Her memorial service had been classified, attended only by a handful of people with the highest security clearances. Rodriguez himself had heard about it through unofficial channels, the kind of information that filtered through the special operations community like underground water. Yet here she stood, very much alive in his training facility. Rodriguez's mind raced through possibilities. Was this some kind of test? A security exercise? Or was the woman standing before him actually the legendary Sarah Mitchell, somehow returned from the dead? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but Rodriguez caught a slight tightening around her eyes. She was waiting for his reaction, evaluating him just as carefully as he was evaluating her. Other trainees were beginning to notice their conversation. A few had stopped their exercises to watch, curious about what had captured their chief's attention so completely. Rodriguez realized he needed to make a decision quickly before this became a spectacle. "Follow me," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded once and fell into step beside him as they walked toward the administrative building. Neither spoke as they made their way across the compound, but Rodriguez could feel the weight of her presence beside him. He led her to a small office used for private consultations, closing the door firmly behind them. The room was sparse, containing only a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet. A single window looked out onto the training grounds where other personnel continued their exercises. Oblivious to the drama unfolding just yards away, Rodriguez turned to face Sarah, studying her features more carefully in the better light. The resemblance to the classified photos he had seen was unmistakable, but there were differences too. She looked older, more weathered. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of experiences beyond her years. "Sarah Mitchell died in Pakistan," he said quietly, watching her reaction carefully. "I saw the classified report myself." Sarah's expression didn't change, but she moved to the window and glanced out at the training grounds before responding. When she turned back to Rodriguez, there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there moments before. "Sarah Mitchell did die in Pakistan," she said softly. "At least that's what needed to happen for the mission to succeed." Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. He had been involved in enough black operations to understand the implications of her words. Sometimes the only way to complete an assignment was to officially cease to exist. "My real name is Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell," she continued, settling into one of the chairs. "CIA Special Activities Division, assigned to Joint Special Operations Command for the past 4 years. My official death was a necessary cover for an ongoing operation that required me to disappear completely." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small device that looked like a standard military communications unit. She pressed a series of buttons and Rodriguez heard a faint beeping sound. "That's a secure authentication code," she explained. "Your base security system just received verification of my identity and clearance level. In about 30 seconds, your commanding officer is going to get a call from someone very high up the chain of command." As if on cue, Rodriguez's phone began to ring. He glanced at the caller ID and felt his stomach tighten. The call was coming from Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters. "Chief Rodriguez," came the voice of Admiral Harrison, a man Rodriguez had only spoken to twice in his entire career. "You are to provide full cooperation to the individual currently in your office. This conversation is classified at the highest levels. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Rodriguez replied, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Good. You'll receive written orders within the hour. Harrison out." The line went dead, leaving Rodriguez staring at his phone in disbelief. Sarah watched his reaction with a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I know this is a lot to process," she said, "but I need your help, Chief. The mission I've been working on for the past 18 months is entering its final phase, and I need access to your training facilities." Rodriguez set down his phone and studied her carefully. "What kind of mission requires a dead CIA operative to train with Navy SEALs?" Sarah's expression grew serious. "The kind that involves a terrorist cell planning to attack multiple military installations along the East Coast. The kind where my cover identity has been so deep that I've spent over a year living as one of them, earning their trust, learning their plans." She stood and began pacing the small office, her movements controlled but restless. "For the past 18 months, I've been Isabela Santos, a former Mexican military officer with a grudge against the United States government. I've been part of a network that's been planning something big, something that could kill hundreds of American servicemen and women." Rodriguez felt his training kick in. This was the kind of briefing he'd received dozens of times before major operations, but never from someone who had been presumed dead. "The attack is scheduled for next week," Sarah continued, "during the annual joint training exercise when multiple units will be concentrated in a small area. They've been planning this for 3 years, waiting for the perfect opportunity." "Why come to me?" Rodriguez asked. "Why not go through official channels?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Because there's a leak somewhere in the intelligence community. Someone has been feeding information to the cell, keeping them one step ahead of every attempt to infiltrate them. The only reason I've stayed undetected is because officially I don't exist." She moved to the desk and leaned against it, her eyes meeting his directly. "I need to maintain my cover until the last possible moment. That means I need to be able to demonstrate specific skills to the cell leaders, skills that only someone with advanced military training would possess." "What kind of skills?" "Close quarters combat, advanced weapons handling, tactical planning. The kind of things your people train for every day. I need to be able to walk into a room full of experienced fighters and prove that I belong there." Rodriguez was beginning to understand. "You need to use our facilities to sharpen your skills without officially being here." "Exactly. Isabela Santos needs to be perfect when she meets with the cell leadership tomorrow night. One mistake, one moment of doubt about my abilities, and the entire operation falls apart." The weight of what she was asking began to settle on Rodriguez's shoulders. She was asking him to help her maintain a cover identity that would allow her to prevent a major terrorist attack. But she was also asking him to trust someone who, according to official records, was supposed to be dead. "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice dropping even lower. The cell has been recruiting from within the military. They have people on the inside, people with security clearances and access to sensitive information. That's how they've been able to plan this so effectively. Rodriguez felt a cold anger building in his chest. The idea of military personnel betraying their oath, their brothers and sisters in arms, made him sick. "How many?" he asked. "At least 3 that I've identified, possibly more. One of them is in a position to provide real-time intelligence about the joint exercise. They'll know troop movements, security protocols, everything." She reached into another pocket and withdrew a small flash drive. "This contains everything I've learned about the cell, their plans, their capabilities. But I can't act on it yet. I need more information about the inside sources, and I need to identify the exact target location." Rodriguez stared at the flash drive, understanding the weight of the decision before him. Everything Sarah was telling him could be verified through proper channels, but that would take time they didn't have. More importantly, it might expose her if there really was a leak in the intelligence community. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Sarah looked directly into Rodriguez's eyes as she outlined her request. "I need access to your advanced combat training modules after hours. No official records, no paperwork trail. Just a few hours each night to maintain the edge that's kept me alive for the past 18 months. Rodriguez considered her words carefully. What she was asking went against every protocol he'd followed for over 2 decades. But the alternative, allowing a terrorist attack to succeed because he followed procedure, was unthinkable. "The base security system will log every entry," he said. "Not if you're with me as my escort. Senior chiefs have authority to bring cleared personnel into training areas for special instruction. As long as you're present, the system won't flag it as unusual." She was right, of course. Rodriguez had used that protocol before when working with other agencies or foreign military personnel. The system was designed to allow flexibility for legitimate training cooperation. "What about your cover story? How do you explain being here?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Isabella Santos is supposed to be scouting military installations for potential vulnerabilities. The cell leaders think she's gathering intelligence for the attack. They have no idea she's actually working to prevent it." Over the next 3 hours, Rodriguez watched Sarah demonstrate skills that exceeded those of most of his veteran operators. Her marksmanship was flawless, her close-quarters combat technique was precise and deadly, and her tactical thinking was several steps ahead of standard training protocols. But what impressed him most was her ability to switch personas. When other personnel were around, she became Isabella Santos completely. Her posture changed, her accent shifted, even her facial expressions transformed. She was no longer the confident CIA operative he'd been talking to, but a cold, calculating woman with clear hostility toward American military personnel. "The cell leaders will test me tomorrow night," she explained, during a break between training modules. "They're suspicious by nature, especially of new recruits claiming advanced military training. I need to be able to demonstrate my abilities without hesitation." Rodriguez watched her work through a complex hostage rescue scenario, noting how she adapted standard techniques to create solutions that were both effective and brutally efficient. This wasn't the kind of training they provided to regular military personnel. This was the advanced coursework reserved for the most elite units. "Where did you really learn to fight like this?" he asked. 3 years embedded with Taliban fighters," she replied matter-of-factly. "They don't survive long without being very, very good at killing people. I had to be better than them to maintain my cover." The casual way she said it sent a chill through Rodriguez. He'd worked with plenty of operators who had seen serious combat. But there was something different about Sarah. She moved through violence like it was a natural extension of her body, without emotion or hesitation. "The cell I'm infiltrating now is different from the Taliban groups," she continued, moving to the next training station. "More sophisticated, better equipped, and much better connected. They've been planning this attack for 3 years, studying American military procedures, identifying weaknesses." She demonstrated a knife-fighting technique that Rodriguez had never seen before, a combination of traditional military combat training and something else, something more primitive and deadly. They recruited Isabella Santos because they believed she had specific knowledge about American military vulnerabilities. What they don't know is that Sarah Mitchell has been feeding them carefully crafted intelligence designed to lead them into a trap. Rodriguez was beginning to understand the complexity of her operation. She wasn't just gathering intelligence on the terrorist cell. She was actively manipulating their planning process, steering them toward a confrontation she could control. Tomorrow night's meeting isn't just a test of my combat skills, she explained. It's the final planning session before the attack. They're going to reveal the exact target, the timing, and the roles each member will play. And you'll be recording everything? Everything I can. But more importantly, I'll be in position to sabotage the operation from within when they make their move. Rodriguez watched her work through a series of advanced tactical scenarios, each one designed to test decision-making under extreme stress. She moved through them with a fluidity that spoke of real combat experience, the kind that couldn't be taught in any training facility. There's something else you should know, she said as they moved to the final training module. The cell has been watching this base for months. They know about the joint exercise, they know about the security protocols, and they know about key personnel, including me, including you. They have photos, personal information, family details. They've done their homework on everyone they consider a potential threat. The personal threat didn't bother Rodriguez as much as the implications for base security. If the cell had that level of detailed intelligence about personnel and operations, their inside source was someone with significant access. Do you know who the leak is? Sarah's expression grew cold. I have suspicions, but I need proof. Tomorrow night's meeting should provide that. The final attack plan will require real-time intelligence that only someone with high-level clearance could provide. She completed the final combat scenario with the efficiency that left Rodriguez genuinely impressed. Whatever else Sarah Mitchell was, she was undoubtedly one of the most capable operators he'd ever encountered. There's one more thing, she said as they prepared to leave the training facility. If something goes wrong tomorrow night, if my cover is blown or if the operation goes sideways, you need to be ready to act immediately. She handed him an encrypted communication device. This will give you direct contact with my handler at CIA. If you don't hear from me by midnight tomorrow, or if you receive a distress signal on this device, you'll need to implement emergency security protocols for the entire base. Rodriguez pocketed the device, understanding the weight of responsibility she was placing on him. What are the chances of something going wrong? Sarah's smile was grim. In my experience, Chief, something always goes wrong. The question is whether you're prepared when it does. The warehouse sat in the industrial district, surrounded by abandoned shipping containers and rusted machinery. Sarah approached on foot, having parked her motorcycle 3 blocks away as instructed. She had spent the entire day preparing for this moment, reviewing every detail of Isabella Santos's background and rehearsing the personality she had carefully constructed over 18 months of deep cover work. As Isabella, she walked with a different rhythm, her shoulders held with the arrogance of someone who had seen real combat and survived. The scar above her eyebrow, which she had earned during a firefight in Afghanistan, now served as proof of her manufactured history as a former Mexican military officer turned mercenary. 2 men flanked the warehouse entrance, their hands resting casually near concealed weapons. They recognized her immediately, nodding as she approached. She had worked hard to earn their trust over the past months, proving her value to the organization through carefully orchestrated demonstrations of her skills and her supposed hatred for the American military. Isabella, one of them said in accented English. They're waiting for you inside. The warehouse interior was dimly lit, with a single table surrounded by chairs in the center of the space. 5 men sat around the table, each representing a different aspect of the cell's operations. Sarah recognized them all from months of careful observation and intelligence gathering. At the head of the table sat Viktor Kozlov, a former Russian Spetsnaz operative who had become the cell's primary tactical planner. To his right was Ahmed Hassan, a bomb-making expert with connections to several Middle Eastern terrorist organizations. The other 3 were Americans, military personnel who had been recruited over the past 2 years. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the Americans. One was a staff sergeant from the base's communication center, another was a lieutenant from intelligence, and the third was someone she hadn't expected to see. Master Sergeant David Collins, a decorated special operations veteran who had served with distinction for 15 years before apparently becoming disillusioned with American foreign policy. Collins' presence changed everything. He had access to operational security protocols that could compromise not just the base's defenses, but potentially dozens of ongoing missions worldwide. Isabella, Kozlov said in heavily accented English, please sit. We have much to discuss tonight. Sarah took her place at the table, maintaining the cold, calculating demeanor that had served Isabella Santos so well. She let her eyes move around the group, acknowledging each member with the respect due to fellow professionals. The time has come for final preparations, Kozlov continued. The joint training exercise begins in 4 days. All units will be concentrated in the southern training area exactly as we planned. Ahmed Hassan opened a laptop and turned it toward the group. On the screen was a detailed satellite image of the naval base, with various buildings and facilities marked in different colors. The primary target will be the command center during the morning briefing, Hassan explained. At 800 hours, approximately 200 personnel from 5 different units will be gathered in a single location. Sarah felt her blood run cold. 200 military personnel, including some of the most elite operators in the American military, would be gathered for what they thought was a routine training briefing. It would be a massacre. The secondary targets are the communication center and the weapons depot, Hassan continued. Simultaneous attacks on these locations will prevent any coordinated response and ensure maximum casualties. Collins leaned forward, his expression businesslike and professional. I can provide real-time updates on security protocols and personnel movements. The base's emergency response procedures have been modified for the training exercise, which will work in our favor. Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral, while her mind raced through the implications. Collins wasn't just providing intelligence. He was actively sabotaging the base's defensive capabilities. What about the SEAL training facility? Asked the communications sergeant. They have a significant number of personnel there as well. Kozlov smiled coldly. That facility will be dealt with separately. Isabella has been conducting reconnaissance there under the guise of evaluating their security weaknesses. All eyes turned to Sarah, and she felt the weight of their expectation. This was the moment she had been preparing for, when Isabella Santos would prove her worth to the organization. The facility is vulnerable, she said, her voice carrying the confidence Isabella was known for. Their security protocols are predictable, and their response times are slower than they should be. With the right approach, a small team could neutralize the entire training cadre before they could mount any effective resistance. It was a lie, of course. Rodriguez and his team were among the most capable operators she had ever encountered. But Isabella Santos was supposed to provide intelligence that would help the cell succeed, even as Sarah Mitchell was working to ensure they failed. Excellent, Kozlov said. You will lead the team targeting the SEAL facility. Your knowledge of their procedures and your combat skills make you the logical choice. Sarah nodded, understanding that she was now positioned exactly where she needed to be to sabotage the operation from within. But she also realized that her role in the attack would require her to maintain her cover until the very last moment. Hassan pulled out a series of photographs showing various locations around the base. These are the staging areas where we will position our equipment. The vehicles are already in place, disguised as maintenance trucks. The weapons and explosives are stored in location Alpha, ready for distribution tomorrow night. The lieutenant from intelligence opened his own laptop and began showing detailed floor plans of the command center. Security will be minimal during the briefing. They're expecting a routine training exercise, not a coordinated attack. The guards will be positioned here, here, and here, he said, pointing to specific locations on the plans. Sarah memorized every detail while maintaining Isabella's cold, professional demeanor. She was gathering intelligence that would allow her to warn Rodriguez and base security, but she was also being drawn deeper into the planning of an attack that would kill hundreds of innocent people if she made any mistakes. There is one more thing, Kozlov said, his eyes meeting Sarah's directly. We have reason to believe that there may be an intelligence operative attempting to infiltrate our organization. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat, but Isabella Santos would not show fear. She met Kozlov's gaze steadily, allowing a slight smile to play at her lips. Only one? She said. The Americans must be getting careless. Kozlov laughed, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. Perhaps, but we cannot afford to take chances, not when we are so close to success. That is why tomorrow night, before we distribute the weapons, each member of this organization will undergo a final verification process. The room fell silent, and Sarah realized that her 18 months of careful cover building might all come undone in the next 24 hours. The verification process took place in a different warehouse across town, one Sarah had never seen before. As she entered the building, she immediately noticed the sophisticated equipment set up in the center of the space. This wasn't going to be a simple interrogation or background check. They had brought in professional counterintelligence equipment. Kozlov stood beside a table covered with electronic devices, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. The other cell members formed a semicircle around the table, creating an atmosphere of judgment that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Each of us will submit to the same process," Kozlov announced. "Polygraph examination, voice stress analysis, and detailed questioning about our backgrounds and motivations. No one is exempt." Sarah watched as Hassan stepped forward first, submitting to the battery of tests with calm professionalism. The process took nearly an hour, covering everything from his childhood in Syria to his specific reasons for joining the cell. The machines hummed quietly throughout, recording his physiological responses to each question. When it was Master Sergeant Collins's turn, Sarah paid careful attention to his responses. His story was that disillusionment with American foreign policy had led him to seek revenge against the system he once served. The machines indicated he was telling the truth, which meant his betrayal was genuine, not part of some elaborate counterintelligence operation. The communications sergeant and intelligence lieutenant went through the process with similar results. Their motivations seemed to be financial rather than ideological, but their commitment to the cell's objectives appeared genuine. Then it was Sarah's turn. She approached the table with Isabella Santos's characteristic confidence, but internally, her mind was racing through every detail of the cover story she had constructed. 18 months of living as Isabella had created a network of memories and experiences that felt real even to her. The key was to believe in the character completely, to become Isabella so thoroughly that even sophisticated detection equipment would be fooled. "State your full name," the technician operating the equipment said in accented English. "Isabella Maria Santos," she replied, allowing her voice to carry the slight Mexican accent she had perfected. The question started simply, covering basic biographical information that she had rehearsed thousands of times: place of birth, family background, military service record. Each answer was carefully crafted to match the documentation the cell had verified months earlier. But as the questioning continued, it became more specific, more dangerous. "Describe your first kill as a soldier," the technician said, watching the readouts on his equipment carefully. Sarah let her mind drift back to Afghanistan, to a firefight in a mountain village where she had been forced to shoot a Taliban fighter who had discovered her true identity. She described the scene from Isabella's perspective, as a Mexican military officer serving with a UN peacekeeping force. "Why did you leave the Mexican military?" "Because they were weak," she replied, allowing genuine anger to color her voice. "They took orders from politicians who cared more about American approval than Mexican sovereignty. I grew tired of serving a government that valued foreign opinion over national pride." The machines continued to hum, recording her physiological responses. Sarah knew that the key to beating polygraph equipment was not to try to fool it, but to believe so completely in your cover story that your body responded as if it were the truth. "Tell us about your first contact with our organization," Kozlov said. Taking over the questioning personally, Sarah described the carefully orchestrated meeting that had taken place 6 months earlier, when Isabella Santos had been recruited through a network of contacts in the international arms trade. She had spent weeks preparing for that first encounter, building a reputation that would attract the cell's attention. "You claim to have intelligence about American military vulnerabilities," the technician continued. "How did you acquire this information?" "Through careful observation and the exploitation of personal relationships," she replied. "American soldiers are predictable in their weaknesses. They trust too easily, they follow procedures too rigidly, and they underestimate anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of a threat." It was a perfect Isabella Santos response, combining tactical insight with personal contempt for American military personnel. The machines registered it as completely truthful because, from Isabella's perspective, it was. The questioning continued for over an hour, covering every aspect of her background and her involvement with the cell. Sarah answered each question with the confidence of someone who had lived the experiences she was describing. The months of deep cover work had created a parallel set of memories that felt as real as her actual past. Finally, the technician looked up from his equipment and nodded to Kozlov. "She's clean." All responses indicate complete truthfulness. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she was careful to maintain Isabella's cold, professional demeanor. This had been the most dangerous test of her cover story, and she had passed it completely. "Excellent," Kozlov said, his expression relaxing slightly. "Now we can proceed with full confidence in each other." But as the group prepared to leave the warehouse, Collins approached Sarah with a serious expression. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. "I've been monitoring communications at the base, and there's been some unusual activity in the past few days. Someone has been asking questions about security protocols and personnel access." Sarah felt her blood run cold. If base security was investigating unusual activity, it might be related to her training sessions with Rodriguez. If they had discovered her presence on the base, it could compromise the entire operation. "What kind of questions?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "The kind that suggests someone is looking for weaknesses in our security. It could be routine, or it could be that they suspect something. Either way, we need to be extra careful over the next few days." Sarah nodded, understanding that Collins was trying to protect the operation, unaware that he was actually helping her. His warning about increased security measures would allow her to adjust her plans accordingly. As they left the warehouse, Kozlov pulled her aside once more. "Tomorrow night we distribute the weapons and finalize the attack timing," he said. "After that, there will be no turning back for any of us. Are you prepared for what must be done?" Sarah met his gaze directly, channeling every ounce of Isabella Santos's cold determination. "I've been preparing for this my entire life," she replied. "The Americans will pay for their arrogance, and I will be there to watch them fall." Kozlov smiled with genuine warmth for the first time since she had known him. "Good. Tomorrow night, Isabella Santos will help us change history." As she walked away from the warehouse, Sarah realized that she now had less than 24 hours to prevent the largest terrorist attack on American soil since September 11th. The final phase of her mission was about to begin, and any mistake could result in the deaths of hundreds of innocent people. Sarah sat in her apartment at 0200 hours, surrounded by encrypted communication equipment and detailed maps of the naval base. In 6 hours, the joint training exercise would begin, and 200 of America's finest military personnel would gather for what they believed was a routine briefing. Unless she acted now, they would walk into a massacre. The encrypted device Rodriguez had given her lay on the table beside her laptop. She had been staring at it for the past hour, knowing that activating it would set in motion a chain of events that would either save hundreds of lives or result in her death when her cover was blown. But first, she had one final task to complete as Isabella Santos. At 0300 hours, she arrived at the third warehouse, where the cell had stored weapons and explosives for the attack. Kozlov was already there, along with Hassan and the 3 American conspirators. Crates of assault rifles, grenades, and plastic explosives were arranged throughout the space. "Tonight, we make history," Kozlov announced as the group gathered around a table covered with building schematics. "Isabella, you and Collins will lead the assault on the SEAL training facility. Hassan will handle the command center. The communications team will disable the base's ability to call for help." Sarah nodded, accepting the assault rifle Kozlov handed to her. The weight of the weapon felt familiar in her hands, but now it represented everything she had spent 18 months working to prevent. "The timing must be perfect," Kozlov continued. "At exactly 0800 hours, all teams strike simultaneously. The Americans will have no time to mount any coordinated defense." Collins spread out detailed floor plans of the SEAL facility, pointing to specific locations. "Isabella's reconnaissance has identified the optimal entry points. We can neutralize the entire training cadre within minutes if we move fast enough." Sarah studied the plans, memorizing every detail while appearing to plan an assault on people she had come to respect. Rodriguez's face flashed through her mind, and she realized that in a few hours, she might be forced to choose between maintaining her cover and protecting the man who had trusted her with his life. "One final equipment check," Hassan announced, opening a crate of electronic detonators. "These devices will ensure that our secondary explosions achieve maximum effect." As the group dispersed to conduct their final preparations, Sarah found herself alone with Collins for a moment. "You seem nervous," he observed, studying her face carefully. "Not nervous," she replied, channeling Isabella's cold confidence. "Eager. I've been waiting 18 months to make the Americans pay for their arrogance. Collins nodded, but she caught a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. After 15 years of special operations, he had developed instincts that were difficult to fool, even for someone with her training. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly. "I've been monitoring communications from CIA headquarters. There's been increased chatter about a missing operative, someone who was supposedly killed in Pakistan but whose body was never recovered." Sarah's heart began racing, but Isabella Santos would not show fear. "What does that have to do with us?" she asked. "Maybe nothing. But the timing is suspicious. The increased activity started right around the time you joined our organization. I'm probably being paranoid, but paranoia keeps us alive," Sarah interrupted. "If you suspect there's a problem, we should investigate it thoroughly." Collins studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "You're right. After tomorrow, it won't matter anyway. The Americans will have bigger problems than one missing CIA operative." As dawn approached, Sarah knew she could wait no longer. She excused herself from the group, claiming she needed to conduct final reconnaissance of the SEAL facility. Instead, she drove to a location 3 miles from the naval base and activated Rodriguez's encrypted communication device. "This is Sarah Mitchell. Authentication code Delta 7 Alpha." She spoke into the device. "I need immediate contact with my handler." Within seconds, a familiar voice responded. "Sarah, this is Control. We've been monitoring the situation. What's your status?" "The attack begins in 4 hours," she said urgently. 200 personnel will be targeted during the morning briefing. I have complete intelligence on the cell's plans, but I need immediate backup to prevent the massacre." "Understood. We're coordinating with base security now. Can you maintain your cover until we're in position?" Sarah glanced at her watch. "I have to return to the cell in 30 minutes or they'll become suspicious. Collins is already showing signs of doubt about my identity. Hold your position as long as possible. We're moving assets into place now." Sarah ended the communication and drove back toward the warehouse, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether her 18 months of deep cover work would save lives or end in disaster. When she arrived, Kozlov was distributing final equipment and going over timing one last time. "Remember," he told the group, "once we begin, there is no retreat. We fight until the Americans are defeated or we die trying." The group moved out in separate vehicles, each team heading toward their assigned targets. Sarah found herself in a truck with Collins and 2 other men, all armed with assault rifles and explosives. As they approached the naval base, she could see the first signs of increased security activity. "Something's wrong," Collins said suddenly, pointing toward the main gate. "There are too many guards and they're checking vehicles more thoroughly than usual." Sarah's heart sank as she realized that the base security response might have been too obvious, potentially alerting the cell to the fact that their plans had been discovered. "Should we abort?" one of the other men asked nervously. Collins studied the security checkpoint through binoculars for several minutes before responding. "No, this could be routine security for the joint exercise. We proceed as planned." As they approached the SEAL training facility, Sarah knew she was running out of time. In a matter of minutes, she would be forced to choose between maintaining her cover and protecting innocent lives. The truck stopped at a service entrance that Collins had identified as vulnerable. As the men prepared their weapons and explosives, Sarah made her decision. "Collins," she said quietly, "there's something you need to know." He turned toward her, and in that moment, she struck with the lightning-fast precision she had learned during her years of training. Collins dropped unconscious before he could react, but the sound of his body hitting the truck floor alerted the other 2 men. Sarah moved like a force of nature, neutralizing both men within seconds using techniques that went far beyond anything Isabella Santos was supposed to know. As sirens began wailing across the base, she grabbed Collins's radio and contacted the other teams. "This is Isabella," she said, perfectly mimicking the cold voice the cell members knew. "Abort immediately. Base security has been alerted. All teams fall back to the secondary rally point." The deception bought her precious minutes as confused team members hesitated, unsure whether to continue their attacks or retreat as ordered. Rodriguez appeared at the truck door, flanked by a full SEAL assault team. "Sarah, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she replied, stepping over the unconscious forms of the would-be terrorists. "But Hassan's team is still moving toward the command center. They have enough explosives to bring down the entire building." "Already handled," Rodriguez said with a grim smile. Your intelligence allowed us to intercept them before they reached the target. As military police secured the area, and medics attended to the unconscious cell members, Sarah finally allowed herself to drop the Isabella Santos persona she had maintained for 18 months. The relief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by the knowledge that several American military personnel had chosen to betray their country for money or ideology. "What happens now?" Rodriguez asked as they watched the prisoners being loaded into military vehicles. "Now I get to officially come back from the dead," Sarah replied. "Sarah Mitchell's mission is complete. Isabella Santos can finally disappear forever." 3 months later, Sarah sat in a debriefing room at CIA headquarters, providing final details about the terrorist cell and the intelligence network they had been planning to exploit. The attack had been prevented, but the investigation into military personnel with divided loyalties was ongoing. "You did exceptional work," her handler said as the debrief concluded. 18 months of deep cover, maintaining a false identity while preventing a major terrorist attack. The president himself has signed a commendation for your service." Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The experience had changed her in ways she was still trying to understand. Living as Isabella Santos for so long had required her to embrace a darkness that was difficult to leave behind. "What's next for me?" she asked. "Rest, recovery, and when you're ready, there are other missions that require someone with your unique skills." As Sarah walked out of the CIA building and into the bright Washington sunshine, she thought about Rodriguez in the SEAL training facility where her mission had begun. The chief had trusted her when trust could have cost hundreds of lives. That kind of faith was rare in her world, and she knew she would carry the memory of it with her for the rest of her career. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of military aircraft conducting training exercises, the everyday work of keeping America safe continuing as it had for generations. The terrorist cell had been stopped, the inside threats had been neutralized, and life would go on for the people she had sworn to protect. But Sarah Mitchell knew that in the shadows, other threats were already forming. Other enemies were planning attacks on innocent people. When the time came, when her country needed someone willing to disappear into darkness to protect the light, she would be ready. The woman who had been declared dead in Pakistan, who had lived as Isabella Santos for 18 months, who had prevented a massacre through sheer determination and skill, walked away into the crowd and vanished once again. This time, though, she carried with her the knowledge that some battles are worth fighting, no matter what the cost to oneself. And somewhere in a SEAL training facility, Chief Rodriguez continued preparing the next generation of warriors, knowing that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people whose names will never appear in history books, whose sacrifices will never be publicly acknowledged, but whose courage makes all the difference in the world.